Anything more than 3 reps is cardio. It's a motto that gets thrown around a lot in the powerlifting space. It's one that I subscribe to for far longer than I care to admit, and ultimately I think probably the biggest mistake I've made in my 20 or so years of training in the gym. Hating on cardio has been almost a rite of passage for meatheads for far too long. It doesn't matter whether you were the one that got sold by the idea of the marathoner versus bodybuilder image comparison, or you were sold the lie of the interference effect that perhaps all that cardio is going to ruin your hard-earned gains, or like me, you just like the idea of moving less and eating more. We all seem to fall for that trap at some point. The reality, though, for most of us, is that the interference effect, that idea that the cardio will ruin your gains, is completely overblown and in many cases actually the opposite. For most of us, improving your base level of cardiovascular fitness is one of the quickest ways to improve your results across the board with a relatively low impact upon your actual results. And if anything, you're far more likely to end up with a longer and stronger career either on the platform or in the gym because you've built a really solid aerobic base. With the right approach, we can see relatively quick gains in your cardiovascular fitness levels, and done well will do it with almost no negative impact on your long-term results, and in many cases that improved base of fitness is going to allow you to train harder, which means you're going to get more out of the time you spend in the gym, and ultimately that's going to translate to bigger PRs on the platform or in the gym where it counts. This video is part 1 in a yet to be determined number of videos in this series on cardiovascular fitness and how we can add it into our training programs. In this video, we're really looking at just an overview of the energy systems that your body has for synthesizing the energy we need to produce movement and day-to-day life, and helping you have a bit of a better grasp on how we use those things in the training environment. And then in the following videos, we'll look at some ways of measuring your output when it comes to cardiovascular work, so things like heart rate and RPE for cardio and stuff like that. And then some more practical applications of what this might look like depending on what it is you're training for and how we're best going to add it to your training program without having a negative impact upon your results in the short or medium term. The human body needs energy both to fuel movement and just our everyday existence. We get that energy by converting the calories that we eat into a molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. The energy is stored within that molecule, and when broken down into adenosine diphosphate and a phosphate molecule, the energy in that bond is released, and that's what fuels our performance. While we can store a small amount of ATP in our system, that store is very quickly depleted, meaning we need pathways for synthesizing new ATP to be able to continue to fuel our existence. Broadly speaking, the body has 2 main pathways that it synthesizes new ATP molecules through. We have the aerobic and anaerobic pathways. The aerobic or oxidative system, as is suggested by the name, relies on oxygen to produce those ATP molecules. And then the anaerobic system uses no oxygen, and it has 2 pathways within it, the phosphagen and the glycolytic system. Each of these systems synthesizes ATP at a slightly different rate. That means that each system has a maximum capacity or a maximum window in which it's most effective. Traditionally, when we talk about this, we use time domains as a way of describing the contribution of each energy system, and it kind of lends itself to the idea that each energy system works independently. Now, we'll go into a little bit more detail in this further on in the video, but in reality, all of those energy systems are working together at any one time. The relative contribution of each system is largely determined by the duration and therefore by implication the intensity of the activity that you're performing. The phosphagen system, also known as the ATP-PC system, is the body's most immediate source of energy and is generally referenced as having a maximum capacity of somewhere in the vicinity of 10 to 15 seconds. The ATP-PC system relies on both stored ATP and creatine phosphate, a molecule found in the muscle cells of the body that can quickly donate a phosphate to ADP to produce ATP. The glycolytic system, or the anaerobic system, relies on glucose, a simple sugar that's stored in your muscle and liver cells in the form of glycogen. When the glycogen is released, it's broken down back into glucose, which is then, through the process of glycolysis, broken down further to produce the new ATP molecules. The glycolytic system can produce ATP anywhere from 30 seconds to about 2 minutes, depending on the intensity of the activity. And once that stored glycogen has been depleted, the primary system that your body's using is going to switch from those anaerobic processes to the aerobic system. The oxidative system, or the aerobic system, relies on oxygen to produce ATP through a process called cellular respiration. The system relies on the breakdown of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats to produce that ATP, and is the primary energy system we're using for long duration activities. This graph is a nice visual representation of the relative contribution of each of our energy systems, and in this case we've represented it as a percentage of your overall maximum output. We've got time on the x-axis, and you can see the red line is a representation of your overall performance, as I said, as a percentage of your maximal performance or maximum output. Then we've got the aqua line. I'm calling it aqua, but I'm sure my girlfriend, who's a professional curator, will correct me on that one at some stage, or she'll never watch this video. Who can say? So the aqua line that dumps off really quickly at about that 2-second point is your ATP store within the body. Then we've got the dark blue line, which represents your ATP PT system or your phosphagen system. The light blue line is the glycolytic system, and then the green line is the aerobic system. While each of these lines stops, suggesting that the system that it represents is no longer functioning, what you would actually see if you graph this more effectively is that line approaching zero over a long time scale. But it gives you a nice simple representation of the relative contribution of each of these at any given moment in your ongoing performance. Exercise intensity and exercise duration have an inverse relationship, and this should be relatively obvious when you think about something like a 5-rep max squat versus running a 5-kilometer race. The timescale that those two events happen in is significantly different, and thus the contribution from each energy system is going to look markedly different from one activity to the next. Given this, it kind of makes logical sense that you would train within the time domains that you're most likely to be using for the events that you're looking at. But unfortunately, like a lot of things in human performance, it's really not quite that simple. The energy continuum, pictured here, attempts to represent the relative contribution of your aerobic and anaerobic systems for a variety of different sporting activities. Now, while the values represented here aren't perfectly accurate, because the reality is it's far too complex to try and measure those perfectly accurately in a general sense. Each of us comes to the event with a different training background, different levels of fitness in each of these energy systems, and ultimately all of those things contribute to the actual values of the difference between the anaerobic and aerobic systems. But regardless, this graph or continuum does a really nice job of showing you the relative contribution for common activities and gives you a nice idea of why it's important to be training across all of these energy systems in order to improve your results in the long term. Ultimately, the activity that you're going to be training for is largely going to dictate most of the training style that you're going to be using. But with something like this, you can see how training both ends of the spectrum can be very useful in the long term. While your aerobic system might not have a direct or significant impact upon your 1-rep max strength in a powerlifting context or something similar, it does play a very significant role in your ability to both recover between efforts, so between sets within a training session, and between training sessions. And for sports like powerlifting or strongman, where the actual competitive environment is a long and drawn out process, an improved aerobic base is going to allow you to recover quicker between lifts, get in more quality work in a training setting, and in the long term allow you to get more out of the time you spend with the bar in your hands. Like all aspects of human performance, the law of diminishing returns applies here too, both in terms of the amount of dedicated aerobic work you're doing, but also the intensity of that work. The traditional answer to cardio has been some form of HIIT training or high intensity interval training. And despite the fact that franchises of various names across the world trying to convince you that this is the ultimate way to improve your level of fitness, the reality is for most of us, especially in the strength sports arena, it's probably not the most effective answer, both in terms of getting the most out of your actual cardio work, but also ensuring you're not having a significant negative impact upon your ability to do the actual work of getting stronger with a bar in your hands. That pretty much covers everything we need to look at for this overview of energy systems. This is a relatively surface level understanding of it, and it's really about all you need to understand how to add better cardio into your training program. But like always, if you've got any more significant questions or you want to go a little bit deeper into things, please let me know so we can have a chat about it. In the next video, we're going to look a little bit more at how we measure output in the cardio training and how we can best start to add things into your current training program to get the most out of both the time you've got with the bar in your hands and the dedicated work you're putting into improving your cardio fitness.